I don't know if they're starting to record it or not, but one of the most very influential computer scientists, Jaron, I think his name is Jaron Lanier, or Lanier. I think it has like a, it's spelled like Lanier, but I think it has like a French pronunciation. But it's called You Are Not a Gadget. And he really sort of is sort of anti all these social networking things, but not for the reasons you might expect. It's pretty interesting. Okay. All right. That's all right. Bye-bye. All right. Let's bring it up real quick before we get into our actual Yeah, it started recording when I started talking. Who knows at what point that was. Lately, I have been more careful of that, and I don't turn the mic on until I'm ready to actually start talking. That way, if I happen to be saying nonsense, then all right. But anyhow, this is a book. Yeah, it's worth it to check out. I assume this is Amazon, and you can pick it up for $16.97 or $6 $6. Free with Audible. The Kindle version is $11. That's a whole nother topic. Why those cost that much? But anyhow. It's Thursday today, and Thursday is the new Friday for me. So I think I'm a little loopier on Friday than I am the other days of the week. That's my explanation anyhow. Yesterday was a real long day. So it's nice to get a little bit of breathing space today. I think I'm catching up on my grading and so on and so forth. Alrighty. We have two main tasks today. The first main task is to wrap up our discussion of standards and XHTML. Our second task is to dive back in to the topic of positioning via CSS and the CSS box model. Sort of extend the stuff that we've been doing so far to exert even finer control. You know, the more you know about CSS, the finer degree of control you can put on the way your layout works. And you can achieve all sorts of great things layout-wise. First of all, to wrap up XHTML, you might say, what's the difference between HTML and XHTML? And the difference is, actually, the way we've been coding it in this class, there's really not much difference at all. All right? Because I've been coding using what I would call simply good coding practices for HTML. And because of that, pretty much, if you looked at all my examples, if you slap a doc type at the top of them, they probably will all validate. All right? I remember the first day, I didn't do a complete web page, so that one wouldn't validate. But my guess would be that every exercise that I've done since the first day probably would validate. All you have to do is do that. Well, what's the difference then? When HTML was developed, they put a couple, what do I want to call this, idiosyncrasies in it. For example, some exceptions to the rule. For example, every tag needs an ending tag, I've said over and over again. But strictly speaking, in HTML, you're allowed to have some tags without ending tags. All right? For example, with an image tag. You could put an image tag without an ending tag. Or a break tag, which we will not use. But if you used a break tag, you could put it without an ending tag. Even a paragraph tag, I think you could put without an ending tag. All right? So that's like a loophole. It's kind of like all tags have an ending tag, except you can have a couple exceptions here. All right? The other thing is you could use uppercase or lowercase for your tag names. If you notice, I've always used lowercase for everything. You know. Likewise for attribute names. If we say image source equals, in HTML, it's legal to do this. Or this. Whereas if you notice, I've been consistent and always have used lowercase tags. All right. Lastly, tags, or attributes rather, in HTML don't have to have quotes around them. So for example, I could do this. Whoops. I wanted to demonstrate how you could do without quotes, and the first thing I do is put a quote. So ingrained is my habit, by the way, of coding this way. So that would be a legit tag in HTML. All right? Now, as anyone knows, computers prefer rigidly and well-defined things to open-ended things, right? That's why you can't simply look at your computer and say, you know, make a web page that shows information about HTML5 and make it validate in XML 1.0. You can't do that, right? Because that's human languages, and human languages aren't terribly precise, not as precise as machines need them to be. So being able to do that requires, being able to interpret that sentence requires a lot of intelligence, all right? And again, machines simply aren't up to the task. Now, to be sure, you know, if you look at the Siri, that assistant software on the Apple machine, there's some real small levels of, you know, speech recognition and interpreting, but that's really on a very basic level. The bottom line is that computers like very precise languages. If you do a formula in Excel, it has to be a certain way. You can't leave off a parenthesis, whereas a person would look at it and say, oh, you left off a parenthesis. I'll bet they meant to put a parenthesis there. Computer doesn't have that judgment, so it's going to blow up. Likewise, if I was going to do a search in Google for a certain term, I'll get better results if I use some of the advanced features and I format my query, you know, asking for within a certain date range or from a certain site or whatever. So the more precise of language that something is, and the more exacting and the more rigorous and strict the language is, computers tend to do a better job with that. So there's another language called XML. And XML really is not a language itself. XML is sort of a meta language. All right? What does that mean? It's a language that you use to define other languages. All right? It's simply a structure of representing data using tags and attributes. Very, very, very similar to HTML, except the loopholes or the idiosyncrasies have been closed in XML. All right? And are closed in XML. They don't exist. So it's a little more rigid. So, therefore, the differences, the main differences between HTML and XHTML, number one are all tags and attribute names have to be lowercase. Remember, we said in HTML you could use an uppercase A. All tags and attribute names have to be lowercase. That's one of the rules for XHTML. Another rule is that every attribute value has to be enclosed in quotes. All right? And the last main difference is that every starting tag needs an ending tag. So therefore, even if it's an empty tag, like say the image, I have to use that empty tag syntax, whereas this is a start and end tag rolled into one. In other words, this is the equivalent of that. It's just a shorter way to type it. Now, if you're paying attention and you looked through all the examples I've done so far in this class, all my code have followed these guidelines. So, in general, these are just good coding practices in my mind. And again, it will allow you to enforce the rules of XHTML. Now, that being said, there are some rules that are there, both in HTML and XHTML, that either I haven't mentioned, or I maybe have mentioned in passing, or whatever. Those include, for example, having to have a head and body section. Those include having to have a title in the head section. Those include that you can't put other HTML in the head section, such as links or images or whatever. There's limits and there's restrictions to what tags you can put in what tags. And I've sort of implicitly been following these rules, but some of the rules I haven't stated, outward. Therefore, you're apt to, when you go through the process of validating your page, run into some issues that are a little confusing for you. And the only thing I can say is, as you get used to reading the error reports from the validator, it'll become easier to interpret what it's saying. Remember, that's a computer program that's looking at your page and telling you where it noticed that there was an issue. All right, it doesn't have human judgment. If you forget, if you instead of a greater than sign, you use a asterisk, you mistype it, it's not going to say, hey, you forgot a greater than sign there. It's going to give you some long elaborate error about a missing start tag or missing end tag or whatever. Or actually it might give you 10 of those kinds of errors, when really there's just one issue. So the bottom line is, as you're working through this, don't hesitate to ask. And for the online students, again, if you're running into difficulty, don't let this slow you down. This lab, the validation part, is really just about following rules. And if you're doing something wrong and you can't figure out what it is, let me know, and I'll help you get through that process. Typically, a lot of students have a little bit of trouble with some of those rules. Now, what do you gain from XHTML? Well, now that your HTML follows the rules of XML, which in a nutshell is what XHTML is, HTML following the rules of XML, it's in a more rigid format, and therefore other computer programs can do stuff with it. Now, what kind of stuff? A lot of other kind of stuff. All right. There are programs and there are objects that can parse XML documents, that is, look through them and scan and look for pieces of information and so on. And now your pages can be run through those. And again, just in general, it makes your document a little more machine readable if it's in an XML format. Now, XML can be used for other things as well, by the way. Remember, XML itself isn't a language. It's a language that you define other languages in. So it's a set of rules for defining a language. So XHTML is simply HTML stuff fit in the framework of XML. There's something called MML, by the way, which is where you get these really big burly guys and they beat each other. No, wait a minute, that's MMA. My mistake. MML is math markup language. All right. It's a notation that's used to represent mathematical expressions. All right. And so on down the line. There's a lot of, or there can be a lot of MLs, all right, markup languages. Now, the reason that HTML and XML, just as a side note, look so similar, and why I say, well, XHTML is HTML following the rules of XML, yet it's really not that much different, is both HTML and XHTML have a common ancestor, which is known as SGML. All right, so again, that's why they look the same, and that's why to take an HTML document and make it XHTML really isn't that big of a deal. Questions about this? I imagine most of the questions you'll get about this will be, what does this mean in the validator? Because, again, some of those errors can be pretty cryptic. The one thing I would urge you is don't be alarmed if you get a whole bunch of errors. All right? Especially considering the fact that one mistake on your part can translate into many errors in the validator. My suggestion, as with everything, is to do a bit, test it, correct the errors, then move on to the next bit. That way, you're not done and running it through the validator and seeing 6,000 errors, or a lot of errors. I take the same strategy, by the way, regarding browser compatibility. Before I understood this well, web developers would typically do this. They would develop their entire project using their browser of choice. Now, back in the old days, that was a choice between Internet Explorer and Netscape. So you were an Internet Explorer fan, you were a Netscape fan. So you'd develop your website and you'd view it in your browser of choice. All right, looking good, looking good, looking good. All right, I'm done with the project. Now I'm going to go back and cross-browser compatibility test it. And I'll go and I'll try to open it up, let's say, in Internet Explorer. And I have a whole lot of issues with browser compatibility. And then, you usually sit around the rest of the day cursing Microsoft and Internet Explorer and Bill Gates and everyone but yourself, all right, for not following an appropriate strategy for doing a bit of it, testing, then doing the next part. Truth be told, the funny thing is in my example I said I was a Netscape user. Let's look at it from the perspective of an Internet Explorer user. They would do the exact same thing. They would develop their pages, look great in Internet Explorer. If they waited to the end to test them, there'd be a lot of issues in Netscape. All right? In the past, especially, browser compatibility issues were even more probably widespread than they are today even. But again, then they would say the opposite. Internet Explorer's a great browser. Netscape's garbage because it ruined my page. Whereas the Netscape user would say, Netscape's a great browser. Internet Explorer is garbage for ruining my page. Where the truth is, both of them need to learn a more systematic way and a more gradual way of testing their pages so that they can find the errors. All right. Therefore, if I forget, remind me that at each step that I do this, let's look at it in Firefox and look at it in Internet Explorer. Truth be told, it gets more detailed than that if you're truly doing cross-browser compatibility testing, because you'd want to test across different versions of Internet Explorer, different versions of Firefox, Google Chrome, Opera, on a Linux platform, on a Mac platform, and so on down the line. All right. Now we're into the second phase of today's lecture, which is more about CSS positioning. Another way to describe this is we're going to go and we're going to take a wireframe and bring it to life. Would be another way to put this. We're going to take a wireframe that we develop, all right, and make a site from it, all right. And we'll make a site that has several pages in it, and we'll go from there. And I'm going to show you the methodology that I would use if I was doing this. Now, again, you might take a slightly different strategy, but my methodology is going to be this. First, I'm going to design my wireframe. I'm going to go and sketch it out how I want to look it on the page, and it'll probably be a pretty simple wireframe, but it'll be a wireframe. Then I will go and I will make a template for that. What's a template? Well, a template is a web page that I'm going to make that I'm not really going to use, but I'm going to use it sort of to clone and make all my different web pages. Let's say I was, making Christmas cookies. All right. I'm not going to want all the cookies to look the same, right? I don't want all my web pages to look the same. But it's nice, instead of having to hand carve each little Christmas tree out of dough, if you have a little stamper, all right, where you can just go and boom, 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 make a bunch of them, and then you can do the little bit of extra work needed to make each one unique. All right. We're going to take the same strategy with web pages. All right. we are going to create a template, which is kind of like the cookie cutter, which is sort of the mold or the pattern for all our pages. Then we're going to copy that a bunch of times, and then we're going to go back into each page and make the changes that are relevant for each of the pages. All right? Questions about that approach? All right? Let's pick a topic to do our little mini site on. Any ideas? What should we do it on? Pardon me? Vegetables. Okay. That's as good an idea as any. I'm sitting here thinking and scratching my head, as many students do when they have to think of what they're going to do their project on. All right. My suggestion is pick something. All right. Now, this semester, I'm probably going to get 43 websites about vegetables. All right. Please pick a different topic other than that. All right. So I'm going to do a web page about vegetables. All right. And let's just think real quick of what I want my web page to look like. I'm going to have, I don't know. Let's think what pages I want. Let's make like 5 pages. All right. Got to have a home page, right? Got to have a links page. All right. That's 2 of them. We will then list either the 3 favorite vegetables of mine or the first 3 that I can think of. I heard someone say carrots. I like that. Celery. I don't want to spark a debate, but aren't tomatoes, strictly speaking, a fruit? All right. See, this is what happens on web projects, and it'll be 3 hours arguing about this. I'll tell you what. We'll make a 3rd page to say vegetables I hate. All right? So that's going to be our site. It's going to be my site on vegetables. Carrots and celery are probably 2 of my favorite vegetables. And there's a handful of vegetables I absolutely can't eat, won't eat. All right? And we'll go from there. All right. So let's sketch out what my wireframe is going to be. Remember what the wireframe is. The wireframe is sort of, if you will, the 30,000 feet look down on your website and what's the basic structure of it. Now, on a small site like this, we're likely only to have 1 wireframe. We only have 5 pages. All those pages are similar, right, in nature. And therefore, there's probably no real need to go in and make different templates for it. We only have 5 pages. So I'm going to go for a very straightforward template that will look like this. There'll be a banner on the top. There will be my navigation on the side. And that's probably a little big because we only have 5 links. And then there's going to be my main content area. Then maybe I'll have some kind of copyright notice or credits, like maybe if I use images or whatever. All right, I'll put it there. Now, which pieces of this site are going to look the same on all 5 pages, and which pieces are going to look different on all 5 pieces? Content will be different on all 5 pages. The rest, pretty much, is going to be the same. All right. So think of it like writing a form letter, right? If you're sending out a resume in a form letter, all right. Back in the old days, all right, when you had to go and take your cover letter and resume to a printer, right, and get printed copies, you would have one resume and one cover letter sent to everyone. So if you're applying for a cabinet level position, or if you're applying to work the grill at McDonald's, you'd send the same resume out and cover letter, right? Because it would cost too much to have different resumes and cover letters. What do you do now? Or let me rephrase that. What should you do now? You have a basic template of your resume, right? You're the same person. You know, your education experience is the same regardless of what you're applying for. But you might leave some areas blank and fill them in specific to each job you're applying for, especially in your cover letter, right? And even in your resume. You know, you might reword your goal if you're applying for one sort of job versus another. If you're applying for an IT help desk support, as opposed to if you're applying for a web developer position, for example. All right? You might phrase your goals a little bit different. You might rearrange your background a little bit different. But it's all going to start from a basic standpoint. But there's going to be some blanks that you're going to fill in for each specific resume and cover letter that you send out. Same ideas here. This, and this is kind of like our form letter. And this is the blank that we're going to fill in on each page. So, before we start copying this, we should make sure that the core, the stuff that's going to get repeated from page to page to page, is really good, is the way we want it to be. Because once we start copying it, we've multiplied our problems by 5, right? Because if I go back and I realize I misspelled something in the heading, I have to go back and change it on 5 pages. Whereas when I'm building my template, if I realize I've misspelled something, I just have to change it there. All right? Now, one nice thing about this is we can put our CSS code in an external CSS file, right? And that way, we don't have to worry about some slight variations if we want to make some changes to the CSS. We can do that if we've done a real good job of separating our presentation from content. We can do that without messing up our site, and the change will be reflected across all the pages. So let's go and let's build a template for this, and then let's start cloning it. Alrighty. I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a folder. Vegetable site. I'll go in here. I'm going to go in and do what? I'm going to take this page and copy it over just because I'm lazy. I'll go in and gut it of everything. All right. So there's sort of a blank page that we're going to start with. Yeah. Mike's vegetable site will be the title. Now, I'm going to go and I'm going to make my CSS file at the same time. Sometimes when I develop this, I create it right in the document until I'm ready to start cloning it, and then I pull it out. That just makes it a little easier to edit. But I think, based on what I've seen on the previous labs, we need to reinforce the notion of keeping the style sheet in a different file. So therefore, I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a file, and I'll just call it style.css, and we'll fill the details in for that later. All right? And I'm keeping it in the same folder, so therefore I just need to say style.css. Now, if we look at our wireframe, how many main sections do we have? We have 4. What is that going to translate to in terms of HTML code? 4 div tags, right. At least 4 div tags. 4 sort of main div tags. So I'm going to go in the body, and I'm going to say div, and I'm going to give each one of them an ID, all right, so I can reference them individually. Yes?
If you were to just have the banners like an image or something,
I'd put it around it so I can treat the banner and everything in the banner as a unit. So yeah. In other words, if it's literally just an image, I suppose you wouldn't have to, but I would want the flexibility to, what if I decide I want an image and a search button then, or something like that? That'll just give me more flexibility to set it up that way. Now, again, I'm going to give each one of these an ID, because as we can clearly see, I want to treat these different. Right? I want one position in one place, one position in another place, and so on. In addition to that, I might want to do some other styling things. For example, I might want to apply different colors to each of the sections, and so on. So it makes good sense right off the bat to give my 4 main sections their own IDs. Remember, IDs are supposed to be unique. All right, they need to be unique. So if I say the banner div, I'm only pointing to one banner div. All right. So I'll say div ID equals banner. And div. And I'll do the same thing for the navigation, the content, and the footer. It doesn't matter what IDs you give them, but the ID should be descriptive. It should let you know what's going in there, and not necessarily how it's going to look. For example, maybe I want my footer to be yellow on the bottom of the page. I wouldn't call that div yellow, though. All right, because that's the way it looks. We want to talk about what's actually going to be in it, what content's going to be in it. And this is going to be footer content. In other words, it's content that's appearing on the bottom of the page, just sort of like copyright information and so on. All right, now I can start filling in the HTML. And I can do that really without caring on how it's styled because, again, one of our goals is to have a clean separation between the content of the page and the style, the appearance of the page, right? If we do that, then we can achieve our goal of making stuff that's more maintainable. And we can do like they did in CSS Zen Garden. We can take one HTML and put any number of different CSS files to it, right? Let's say, for example, that I was doing this project for the Vegetable Growers of America, all right? I may not know exactly what they want. They might tell me, well, I kind of want it to look like this. I kind of want it to look like that. I could actually develop a prototype and show them 2 or 3 different style sheets and say, which do you like? Option 1, option 2, option 3. If I did that, I wouldn't have to go and make 3 complete different versions of the site. I could use the same HTML and just change the style sheet on every page. And again, you can then, you know, a lot of people, it's very hard for them to envision what a perfect website would look like for their organization, you know. But everyone can look at something and criticize it, right? Make comments, say, I like this, I don't like that, all right? So my banner, I'm going to start out simple, and I'm just going to put an H1 in here that says Mike's Vegetable Site. And I'll put an H2 for good measure that says something like actually, I can put a little mini paragraph in here. Mike's Zeller's view on a variety of vegetables. Now, again, whoops. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm putting in the banner on the page what this page is about. All right? So anyone coming to this page at a glance knows what it is. Now, to be sure, this is sort of a interesting little topic, you know, and I can't say that too many people in the world would be interested in my views on vegetables. But whatever your site is about, make sure it's clear to people the minute they visit your page that this is what it's about. So they don't have to guess, All right. I think I've alluded to this in the past. There is a book in the library called Don't Make Me Think about interface and web design. And a lot of times, software developers will say something like, well, it's on the page what it's about, way down there in the bottom corner. All right. The point is that folks are busy. Folks want to find the information they want quickly, and they don't want to have to hunt through things and figure things out. All right? It has nothing to do with the user being smart or not being smart. It has everything to do with the fact that users are focused on their goals, not on your web design. Or rather, they should be focused on their goals and not on your web design. So, one of the goals of any website is, identify yourself. Let me know what you're about. So at a glance, I can go and see that. All right. I'm now going to create my navigation. And I know already I have 5 pages. Right? I have home, carrot, celery, vegetables I hate, and links. So I'll go and I'll make an unordered list of those 5 links. Generally speaking, your home page should probably be called index.html. The reason for that is that's what web servers look for. When you go to a URL, they look for a page called index.html. So in other words, if you go and type in, www.something.com, by default, there's a series of pages the web server is going to look for, and it will go until it finds one of them. And one of the pages it looks for in that sequence is index.html. So good thing to do would be to call your web pages, your home page rather, index.html. All right, so I'm going to go and I'm going to clone this a few times. Now, we're not necessarily going to do everything perfectly on this one. All right, this is just getting the ideas across. You, of course, when you do yours, you will do it perfectly. Well, we can shoot for that, right? All right, and we'll give each of these their own URL. Yeah, I almost hesitated to say that. It's a strong word, but there you go. There you go. Basic yin and yang there. VIH, vegetables I hate. And then finally a links page, maybe to recipes about vegetables or where you can buy good, a nutrient chart or whatever. Now, for my content area, I'm going to just put some Greek text, right? Because that's going to be different on every page. So I'll go and I'll grab a paragraph of Greek text from my little generator.
So we should put this in there?
Well, I'm doing this in the template, right? Yeah, I would say in the template, you should put that in there. Because that will help you do things like line it up and make sure the font looks readable and that sort of thing. If you don't do that, then the other alternative would be to leave that blank, which isn't good. Or I guess the other alternative would be to make up some text that you're going to use. But the whole part of this exercise is you're not really thinking about the content, you're thinking about the design of the page. So I wouldn't really worry about it, and I would just use that. Now, there are those that would argue that it's better to put real text in a prototype, but again, I think it's acceptable to do this. Now, this, by the way, would correspond to what they would call in the Jesse James Garrett book the surface phase, right? Here's the skeleton. We're now making the actual surface of that web page there. So let's go in and grab a paragraph. All right. Then we can put something in the footer. You know, copyright 2012 images from, if we use images from another site. All right. So again, what I've done is I put the basic content in those divs. Now, which divs did I pay most attention to getting the content right in? Right? The other three, right? Because those other three divs, the navigation, the banner, and the footer, are going to be the same on every single page, right? So I want to make sure I get those right in the template so I can, when I crank out that template and make clones of it, all right, I don't have to go back and change that. That content div, it really doesn't matter what I put in there, right? Because I know I have to change that on every page anyhow, all right? So I just put some filler text in there. All right. So now we're going to go and save this, and I certainly hope we wouldn't have any browser compatibility issues, but we will open it up in each browser. So we can open up in Firefox, and there we go. No styling whatsoever. This looks sort of like the labs, you know, the first few labs that you've done. All right. And let's open it up in Internet Explorer. And it looks the same, right? So far, so good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start styling this. And because my focus today is on positioning things, all right, I am going to, first of all, put a border around everything, just so that we can clearly see each section, all right. Then I'm going to go and put the position on it, and then maybe next week, Tuesday, we can polish it up and maybe give some actual good-looking colors and so on and so forth. But I want to stay focused for the rest of today on the positioning of it. So I'm going to go into my CSS file, and I'm going to create a style rule for each of the divs. And I had banner, nav, all right, let's go and save that. All right, there we have our sections. Now, my goal, remember, is to make it look like this. All right. The first thing that we can do is we can add to each of them, we can add a position. Now, you can position typically, you can set the position from the top, from the left, from the right, or from the bottom. All right. There's a bunch of ways you can specify position. This is 4 of them. So I can specify, and this first example is going to be what we call the fixed layout, where we're going to actually define like pixels where everything's going to lay out. All right. We'll talk about other more flexible kinds of layouts later on. So I will put my banner 10 pixels from the top and 10 pixels from the left. And I will also say position absolute. That means I'm nailing it down on that position. All right? In other words, 10 pixels from the top, 10 pixels from the left. It's going to be nailed down there. Now, if I go and save this, I'm not really going to notice much, if any, of a difference. A little bit of a difference, right? Let's see what happened. Interesting. All right. What is going on here? What's going on here is this. All right. Things are positioned one of two ways. Well, there's a bunch of ways you can position things. Two of the ways you can position things in very broad terms are you can give it a position or you can let the browser figure out where to put it. When the browser figures out where to put it, that's called a flow layout, right? Where just one thing just flows right after the other. All right? By me giving position to that one element, it took it out of the flow and nailed it down on that spot. All right? Which means that the other three elements that I didn't give a position to, all right, follow the flow. And that's what causes those two to overlap. All right? The fact that I gave the one the position and I didn't give the other a position. So this is just a temporary setback. All right? We'll fix this in a minute here as we go in and we start putting things, positions on the other ones. So let's go and I could actually overlap all of them if I wanted to. That'll be fun. If not particularly productive. All right, all of them are on top of each other now. All right, that's obviously not what we want. But what I want to do is I want to put the navigation down a little bit, right? Because if this is 10 pixels from the top, maybe I want to go down 100 pixels from the top for the navigation. So I'm going to go and do that. Now, I still want it 10 from the left, right? Because I want that to line up with that. So I'm going to change the navigation to be 10 from the top. Oh, I'm sorry, 100 from the top and 10 from the left. Thank you. So 100 from the top, 10 from the left. The content, I want to be also 100 from the top, but I want to indent it some from the left. So I'm going to take a shot and just say 100 from the left. And then finally, the footer, I want to be maybe something like 600 from the top and 10 from the left. I just sort of guessed at these numbers. We'll take a look at it and see how it actually looks. And we'll go in and we'll refine it. Oh, not bad. The only difference, the only issue really is that's way down there. I was way off on the footer. So let's make that maybe more like 300. All right. Well, let's see. And already we have our first browser compatibility issue. All right, yay. One of them is obviously right. One of them is obviously wrong. Doesn't matter. We got to fix it. Let's see what the issue is. The issue is, I would think, it looks to me like it's putting a little bit of extra space on the div underneath that paragraph. In Internet Explorer, that ends there. In Firefox, there's a gap between there and there. Yeah. So you just got to move it a little bit more. Right, right. At this point, you know, we could sit and we could ponder and we could open up the W3C school specification and read it, or fire off an angry letter to Bill Gates or whatever. But you know what? You're absolutely right. Just move it a little bit. Who cares who's right? All right? We want to make it to work in both. So let's bump that down a little bit and maybe make the top 150, let's say. Top of this 150. And the top of this we'll make, say, 400. And we'll see. All right? That's Firefox. This is Internet Explorer. Slight differences, but certainly workable in both, right? I mean, it isn't horrible in both. And, you know, it works and it doesn't look horrible in both. Now, we'll obviously make some changes to this to make it look even better. Yes?
That's what I was just going to ask about, like, moving, like, you know, where your links are at,
Mm-hmm.
and moving that over further.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we still need to do with this. Yeah, there's a lot of things we still need to do with this. And some of them will involve some of the box elements that we've talked about already. For example, as you noted, gee, those links look kind of cramped in there, right? Let's make that div wider. All right, so let's go and make that div wider. And
If we make it longer, too, going down,
we could.
Let's spread them out.
Yeah, we could. Exactly. Yeah, we could. And again, what would we do? To make the whole area wider would apply the width. To put space between them would apply padding, right? Or we could apply margin. Sometimes there's a couple different ways you could do the same thing. Yes?
You just remove the bullets and wouldn't it slide back over?
We could remove the bullets through CSS. We could. Again, you know, when I reach the end of a lot of my classes, I wish I had another hour to go, right? And you folks are probably like, no, not that, all right? But we will pick up on this. We at least got through the very basics of positioning. And next time what we'll do is we'll take this and we'll refine it till it looks reasonably good and we're all reasonably happy with it. Then we'll start cloning it and making my actual 5 pages from the template, all right? I'll upload this to Angel, and then we'll see you over in lab.